Okay, recording has started. So, hi folks, I'm Lukasz, AsyncAPI here. We started another public meeting of AsyncAPI. This meeting is being recorded and will be later on uploaded to YouTube. So, yeah, it's just for your information that your faces and names will be visible publicly. Sorry for that, but it's due to transparency reasons. The meeting, as usual, is every 2 weeks in different time zones. And again, like more and more people join. I just click admit. We have few new faces on the meeting, so the beginning of the meeting is always we have a Franz cat, for example. So the beginning of the meeting is always a good moment for people that joined for the first time. If you want to introduce yourself, say something about you, why you joined the call. You don't have to do it, but that's the moment where you can do it. So the stage is yours.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Matt. Yeah, I was just looking to get involved in this the AsyncAPI group and stuff. So I saw the meeting, or Jim pointed it to me actually, or James pointed it towards me. So I work with him. So yeah, just something I'd love to get involved with. Yeah, very interesting.
Cool. Welcome, Matthew. Anybody else wants to add something? Okay, so we have two fixed items, let's say, on the agenda. And the first one is going to be presented by Jim. It's about the idea that Barbanio pointed out on our AsyncAPI Slack, that we might do a AsyncAPI workshop for the community. And it was a perfect moment because I think Barbanio pointed it out a day after Jim joined our Slack. And yeah, Jim immediately jumped in and wants to help. So yeah, Jim, stage is yours. Ah, yeah, of course I didn't give you the rights. Sorry. Now you're co-host, so now you should be able to share your screen.
Awesome. Let me okay, just give me 1 second. Screen sharing issues always the way. Let's see if this works. Okay. I don't know if this is going to let me go full screen, but we'll see. Can you see the slides, or is that gone a bit strange?
Now it's this like presenter view where you can see current slide, next slide. It's the different view.
Ah, okay. Let me see if I can switch that around. How about now? We good?
Perfect.
All right, cool. So yeah, thank you for inviting me to present and talk about API workshops and AsyncAPI workshops. I was going to give an introduction to myself, but it probably makes more sense in the context of this presentation. So my name is James, or Jim. I'm a Java champion and an author. So I've been working on a book recently with Matthew, actually, called Mastering API Architecture. And as part of that, we're writing a chapter on streaming and asynchronous APIs has kind of been the building blocks on top of OpenAPI and where things are going, or at least where I feel things are going in the future. As part of that, I kind of dropped into the community and saw that you were, looking to create a workshop. And one of the things we've done in the past with OpenAPI, and we've done this at O'Reilly conferences and sort of internally where I work, and also for the community as well. We presented a similar workshop on OpenAPI specifications and designing APIs. So this felt like a good opportunity to combine what I'm doing with the book in terms of writing and helping to create this workshop for the community. In my day job, I'm a distinguished engineer working on API platforms, primarily focused on OpenAPI and REST APIs. In a past life, I was a technical trainer, so I spent around 4 years teaching in different companies, workshops and training courses. So it's something I've got a little bit of a background in. So anyway, on to the content of the workshop and less about myself. So one of the approaches, or the approach that I wanted to suggest, and I very much like the way I work is in the open. So I'm more than willing to take feedback, and we will put more of this information onto the GitHub repository so people can essentially contribute to some of the ideas that are here. But I wanted to get to the point where we had a level set of knowledge for participants, effectively doing an overview session. So just a very simple session, lightweight to consume, just explain some of the basics. And then after that, kind of a bit more theory, one of the things that we found from our workshops in the past is that a hands-on approach to learning is by far, the best approach, especially when we're going to potentially run this workshop remotely as well as in person. Like that hands-on helps to keep people engaged and sort of interested in the topic. And to that fact, we try and keep all of the introductions less than 15 minutes. So we want to give enough content and enough pointers, but the majority of the learning is done by coding and exploring AsyncAPI and the associated technologies. So to that effect, we want to make labs that are intuitive to follow. So you can potentially choose whatever language that you want to use. They're about 40 to 50 minutes in time, because again, if you're trying to explore stuff for longer than 50 minutes, you might get a little bit bored. And then the other idea with this is to make sure that the labs are kind of clear in effect, so that you can take these offline if English isn't your first language and just explore them in a bit more detail. You don't have to take 50 minutes. And that's going to be a theme that we run through with this, I think, is that it's either led by an instructor or it's led by somebody else in a classroom. And to that we'll talk about that as well. We want to create a lot of links and examples and resources for a variety of different programming languages. So this is one of the places where I really feel once we get the lab together and the workshop together and we kind of have agreement on the content, asking people to participate, helping to create those sample solutions is going to be a really important aspect to what we do here. And I always like to say this instructor idea of an instructor, they're much more facilitating. So it's much more about a conversation, trying to get people working together in pairs on the labs and exploring some of the content together. So the overall narrative that I was looking to potentially get to was something that looks a little bit like this. And we're trying to, I guess, build up basic knowledge about AsyncAPI and give people enough to be able to, I reckon, just go back to their group or go back to where they work on a sort of for their day job and talk about AsyncAPIs with a bit of confidence. So I think that level set comes first. So we sort of talk about what event-driven architecture is, get some terminology clear, compare it to REST, because I think that's an important starting point that most people that come along to this workshop already have. So it's good to kind of find a common starting point, and maybe just a very brief overview of WebSocket, because that's probably going to be one of the most accessible ways to get started initially. We then kind of go into AsyncAPI, so actually more into the specification, talk about some of the key features that are in the specification, just kind of overview to the community, how it maybe differs from OpenAPI specifications. Really like the diagram that's on the page, where it says this is OpenAPI, this is AsyncAPI, that draws a comparison between the different parts of the spec. And then the lab is really to just get up a hello world WebSocket. Let's see if you can just get something basic started that matches your AsyncAPI specification. And I think with that as well, the idea is using the code generation tools and the VS Code plugin to kind of design the spec, and then using the generator to actually build a sample or a prototype application. So that will be kind of session one and the introduction. We then go into a specification deep dive. So trying to get into more detail around what's in the spec, giving people essentially enough extra knowledge that they're going to need to be able to build out what is essentially like the main application that we'd be building in the lab, which is a group task list. So if you think of like GitHub issues, this is kind of like where I got the idea from as we were actually chatting about the workshop. So different people can add in posts essentially, other people can react to those posts. You can create new issues and those should be published, and kind of like getting the idea of like a collaboration or group task list as being the approach that we take towards that second workshop or second lab. And then the final thing would be to actually then go into some more practical considerations. So what other tooling is available? What other protocols are supported? Like, how do you consider state management, being an important part that we're saying is different from REST? We need to talk about state that's essentially going to be across all of the services. And then how do you participate in the community? So really a plug for bringing more people into the community and contributing where they see gaps. And certainly like the narrative that, well, I've been talking about AsyncAPI in my communities has been around, think of it about Open API Spec, but maybe 6 or 7 years ago, where we need support, we need help on the tooling to really kind of give it that richness that we've got in the same that we would have with Open API as an example. And then finally, like I thought this was kind of a nice part to the workshop where you try and consume somebody else's API. So you build a client, but you use someone else's AsyncAPI spec to pull in that information. And then you can kind of like say, oh, well, why did you do this way? And it kind of brings about a bit more collaboration and kind of gives some learning around the spec and the shapes of the spec itself. So that's kind of the narrative. To go into a bit more detail, I think the event-driven architecture section is all about terminology, a real-world example usage, looking at the difference of REST, and then that high-level WebSocket overview. So I kind of went into a bit of detail around that before. The Hello Async is much about meet the specification. What problems do we solve in the Async API, or what problems are we trying to solve, and explore some of the key definition elements to get started. We'd be using VS Code to create the specification. We generate a set of projects using the tooling, and then we'd be aiming to use a test WebSocket client or a test WebSocket client to be able to query our hello world and to sort of get that initial end-to-end, that immediate. And one of the things I found in workshops is that if you can get that immediate aha moment, then you start to be interested in it. It kind of leads you on into the subsequent sessions. So the next section would be like the spec deep dive. So looking at how we would go further into building full application, talking about design considerations, trying to pick out elements that people will have to think about, or developers will have to think about in the lab itself. And that's where we then start to update our previously working example that had hello world in it to regenerate the to-do list style application, the GitHub issue style application, and start to experiment with how that would work. So then practical considerations, we talk about tooling. I think security is an important point to mention. So bringing in the idea of security, whereabouts that's modeled in the specification, how that's kind of linked into the transport. Like these are the kind of practical considerations that I think are important. It's almost like I want to, at this point in the workshop, I'd be wanting to leave people with a few questions that they would then have to go to the community to explore, or even ask and share that within the session itself. And then the discussion on sort of state management and what state management means and how you kind of handle that. So at that point, you'd be building your client to consume with another developer's application and discussing the design and structure of that as well. Okay, and then this final one, which is not titled so well, is the idea of like the onward project resources and then the roadmap. So I think the nice thing about the AsyncAPI community is we have a roadmap that's set out. There's stuff that's in the future that people might look at and go, actually, can we get that sooner? And it's like, well, you can, but kind of going to have to help if you want to get that. So it's really kind of like giving people those onwards, like, how do I get involved? How do I participate? And where do we go from here? So I think in terms of the workshop, and I have the cycles to contribute to this, it kind of fits directly into the work that I'm doing at O'Reilly to write this chapter within the book. Is I'd like to start to get to creating the content in the open. So essentially creating some of the presentations that would go with these sections to try and hopefully kind of get feedback. So if there's a bit missing, if you think, do you know what, Jim, the best thing I learned about AsyncAPI, you need to put it in this first bit because otherwise people won't understand why it's important to us. I'd be happy to try and like put that in and try and get to the point where we've got a session that makes sense to as many participants or as many people on this call as possible. I think we'll look to use GitHub issues to at least probably put a proposal for each session in place, and that will allow people to provide ideas and suggestions to things they would add to the session, things they would move to different sessions and that kind of thing. And then there are 2 points where I think, we kind of like need to get at least a structure around this so that people can contribute, so that we can get like, I think the best use of everybody's time. But I think the place where we'll get lots of value is having the community participate with providing sample solutions or working on sample solutions, and then also having a pilot class. So we'll learn so much from going through this the first time round, that going through the pilot and then applying any feedback will be really key. And then also whatever we learn and whatever, so I as an instructor, as maybe the first instructor or whoever teaches this first, we'd be creating an instructor guide that others could then take. And then this workshop could be run either as a hack day within a community, within a company. It's kind of like up to you where you run it. But that to me, that would be the final like measure of success, was that anybody who's kind of confident as a developer could pick this up and teach a session, or indeed, if you just want to go through it on your own, it's self-study. So it's the most trying to make it as accessible as possible, really. So thank you very much for the time. Anyway, that's kind of the pitch, as it were, and it'd just be interested to hear anybody's feedback or thoughts or anything that that suggests that might be different.
Hey Jim, it's AsyncAPI. Sorry, my camera's not working this morning. A quick question on your goals. Obviously, there are two things you're trying to do there. One is talk to people about event architectures, and the other is teach people basically how to use AsyncAPI to describe event-based endpoints. What I was really trying to reach for is why both? Why not just one of those? What's the reasoning that you're thinking of, that you want to try and teach event-driven architectures as part of this workshop?
Cool. So that's a really good question, and I think personally, and I'm willing to be proven wrong because I'm fairly new to this as well, is that in order to understand like where AsyncAPI adds value, I think displaying where there's like a problem first helps. So level setting the idea, and I'm not suggesting that we go into a 1 hour Martin Fowler talk on this is what what event-driven architecture is. I think just enough to understand the basic pieces. So if we can understand the basic pieces of the idea of there's essentially a consumer and a publisher, a broker in the middle, that there's essentially messages that are going from one side to the other, but you may or may not be interested in receiving those. I think those actually also, as the API spec kind of gets to, is those are the key points, at least for getting started. Now, the challenge I think with not doing that to begin with is you come in with a REST mindset, you come in with an open API mindset, and it's like, oh, okay, this is completely different. I'm trying to model something, but actually I'm not quite sure what I'm modeling. So I think that the reason for having that first as a level set is so that there's an appreciation of what you're about to try and model in the AsyncAPI specification. So it's not about teaching event-driven architecture per se. I think it's more about just giving enough fundamentals to be able to, for any developer to be able to find practical use in the spec itself. Does that make sense?
It does a little bit, yeah. I mean, I guess I'm curious as to, and I don't know, I don't have any other information, so it's definitely a kind of more open question, to the extent to which does AsyncAPI attract developers who currently work with OpenAPI and Swagger and see this as a route into event-driven architectures, or is it more likely to be people who are currently building event-driven architectures who see the advantage of being able to find a way of consistently documenting their endpoints in the way they have with OpenAPI for REST? I can definitely see the point in a section at the beginning which kind of says, let's agree some concepts and let's agree then how they kind of map to AsyncAPI. I mean, I think you certainly need some of that. But I guess when I look at you saying compared to REST, compared to WebSockets, it's kind of a bit like, are you digging a big hole that adds a lot of complexity and takes the focus away from, hey, here's how to use AsyncAPI to describe one of these? And it is a question. It's not like I have any better knowledge about how that would play out.
So my similar thinking about this, I don't remember from the slides which stage was it, but you put a lot of emphasis on WebSocket, and I would suggest that we do a kind of paths. So you basically talk to the audience, like, do you want to take the path of WebSocket because that's your world and it's going to be easier for you to understand, or maybe let's talk about architecture where there's a broker in the middle, and let's try to explain it on a broker-based architecture. So like to give like you give the basics to the audience, and then you let the audience decide like interactively, like which path they want to take. Because one will, I guess that's for a few people that will work in future with Kafka and brokers. They will not care much about WebSockets. So that's one thing from my side. But the overall,
I was about to raise the same concern, and actually, I think that they fundamentally teach you different things. Like for instance, with the WebSockets, it's true it's event-driven architecture, but it's a client-server model. I mean, usually it's a client-server model. Of course, you can connect to some brokers using WebSockets, but that's not the usual case. And that usually teach you like, client-server model, which is like kind of request response, similar to request response, but with events. And actually, many people try to map request response through WebSockets. Like I send this message, and I'm expecting a response at some point, right? As a response of this message. So introducing something like broker-based architectures and making it clear, like, hey, event-driven architectures can, at the very least, diverge in these two paths, right? Like client-server and broker-based. And then with broker-based, you can do many things. You can do CQRS. You can do, event sourcing. Event sourcing is also possible with the WebSockets, but not with client-server. Sorry. So let's, without going further, just like showing these two paths, right? Like you're backend engineer and you're not doing any front-facing APIs. You're doing just backend APIs or microservices, and you're using Kafka or you're using ActiveMQ or any MQTT broker or whatever. Then you're probably not interested in client server, but more in the broker-based model. And that's also where the spec can get confusing for many people from the publish subscribe point of view. So on the WebSocket side, it's clear. On the client server side, it's clear. You define publish as what your client can do, and subscribe as what your public client can do. But on the broker-based architectures, it's like, who's my client, right? Who's the client here? So that's also that will be also a good opportunity to teach also this meaning of the operations. Like, look, this is what AsyncAPI thinks about publish and subscribe, and just my 2 cents.
Yeah, there is the other side to this as well, that there's a possibility of having essentially like 2 distinct paths that people follow. So as opposed to having like just one workshop or one linear flow that people would go through, and then this is kind of much easier with the remoteness, I guess, at the moment, is that you can almost pick and choose. So as long as you've got like a regular cadence on the sessions that you're running, you could have something that tailors to one or the other, especially if you've got like those 2 distinct use cases. Like you've got people coming at it, I guess, with like a Kafka hat on, to put it one way, or with a WebSockets or client server from another perspective, is potentially to have it so that, if you're interested in those things, your learning path might actually be different, and possibly not actually overlapping the 2 concerns and saying like, look, these are distinct different problems that we're trying to solve, or you might be trying to solve, and actually trying to learn them together is confusing. So that's another option that we could play. So we could put an intro session in that goes into those details and almost like just introduces that as a key point, that there is this difference. The spec kind of handles more than just one thing, really. And then these are your options in terms of like onward sessions. So people can watch that up front, get the level set without having to be there, and then decide which part they're going to go for in the next piece. So we could certainly twist it around and maybe think of things more in that way.
Yeah, definitely that would be the best. because then you can also add more paths based on the feedback from people to see. Like there can be a path dedicated for technical writers, so they can just learn the basics that they need for to be a technical writer for event-driven architectures. One thing I would suggest, you suggested GitHub issues to track like work on every chapter. But you mentioned like mainly to have discussion ideas, etc. So most probably the best would be to actually enable discussions on the training repo, because discussions, they give you these features like vote up and like clear structure. So yeah, if we get too many ideas, it's not so difficult to scroll through comments. And did you think about the length of the workshop? Did you have some?
Yeah, I mean, I guess like my kind of, we've done two formats before. We've done full days and half days. Half days seem to work better because it's easier for people to schedule, like either in with the work they're doing or just take a half day off, whereas a full day starts to become more of a challenge. I guess with the ideal or the nice thing that we could potentially get to is if we have this pick and choose, like then you could drop in for an hour and do the beginning and then an hour and do another piece, as long as there's regular cadence and different times that those things run. That's also a possibility that may work. But I think going above half a day is hard.
Yeah, makes sense.
Don't get me wrong, there's more than enough content to go for probably a week, but I think if we're just like looking to bring people into the community and give them a baseline, a half day or a target of 3 or 4 hours is probably quite good.
Cool. I mean, the work, the intro is super cool. I'm gonna send a link to, I'm not sure if everyone knows that we have already a dedicated repository for the workshop. So whoever wants to follow up with this idea and participate, then if we will decide to enable the discussions, it will happen in this training repository. I just sent it in the chat. Anyone has some more questions to Jim, maybe? Nope. Okay. So yeah, thank you, Jim. I guess we'll just sync on Slack what to do with these issues, discussions, and then we can just start.
Sounds good. Thanks, everyone.
Perfect. Thank you for your time. So the next item on the agenda is 2.1 release. But before that, I just want to mention one thing because I'm going to forget later. And I see there are folks that joined our community because of Google Summer of Code. So just an update for you folks. We did not forget about you, of course. Google Summer of Code is still running. And the deadline is this Thursday. So this Thursday, we're going to pick the projects. And I'm afraid I cannot say more because there are some rules around Google Summer of Code, what we can say publicly and what we can't. So I think we cannot say how many slots we got and who will be accepted. It has to go through the official channels. So unfortunately, you're going to have to wait until the 17th of May to learn if you were accepted or not. But I think important to know is that even if somebody was not accepted, because let's say we got less slots or let's say we got less slots, we were not able to accept everyone. Not that we got less slots, but let's assume we got less slots. But at least me and Fran, we're happy to help out folks that were not accepted, like individually, and we're gonna check with the companies that sponsor AsyncAPI if they could maybe help out. So don't feel discouraged on 17th of May. Just ping us. Whatever was the decision sent to you from Google Summer of Code. Yeah, talk to us. And that's it if it comes to Google Summer of Code, and then the 2.1 release. So yeah, the release is going to happen in June. And that's it. Anyone has some questions? Because I'm not sure really what to say because we talked about it last time and I can just answer a lot of questions. So I've put a thread yesterday in our Slack. So I can just, of course, quickly update. There's just a bunch of things we're going to have to do before the release. You know, what's the contribution guide, how to get your ideas into the 2.1 release. I think 2.1 release already suggests that we don't plan any breaking changes because it's going to be a first time we do such a release after setting up open governance model and joining Linux Foundation. So we want to have it as less complicated as possible. So for sure, if it comes to whatever is going to be accepted for 2.1, it's not something that will break the spec. But other than that, anything can get in. The only requirement is, of course, to have it merged into the feature branches. Because we agreed that, let's say, AsyncAPI spec. If you want to introduce some change into AsyncAPI spec for 2.1, you need to open a pull request to a branch called release 2021 June, something like this. The branch does not exist yet, of course. Info for Dale and for others who already opened PRs, no worries. We're gonna help out to switch everything to the release branch. But yeah, technically, whatever is opened, let's say pull request against the release branch, and it will be merged into the release branch. It means it's gonna get into the 2.1 release. That would be it from my side. Questions?
We contributed a new binding for IBM MQ, but it occurs to me that we never actually submitted a PR to get IBM MQ added to the list of protocols. Is it all right to add a PR to have that in for 2.1?
Wasn't it added? I thought.
I don't think we ever did. I'll double check, but yeah, I don't think we did.
Yeah, then yeah, it's super simple change. So yeah.
Yeah. All right, I'll get that in.
But I think I'm not 100% sure, but I think we.
I'll have a look.
Yeah. Okay. Just double check. But yeah. But if it's not there, then just wait with the pull request once we have the release branch. This and next week is the time where we're gonna start setting up the things, but that should not block you from working on your PRs, folks. And yeah, remember about the contribution guides that whatever is into 2.1 release, it has to be in the spec repo as an edit to the specification, into the AsyncAPI node repo, where we have a project with all the JSON schemas, and a pull request to parser.js, because the current contribution guide requires that at the release date, we at least have the parser updated and supporting the latest version of the spec. So these are 3 repos where PR is needed. But of course, we're helping a lot, so just contact us.
Just to clarify, the changes that are going to be included in the next release are those that reach stage 3, right? If the RFC.
You mean regarding the naming in the contribution guide?
Yeah. So we have these 3 stages, right?
Yeah,
and
yeah, but
all those that reach stage 3 that's included in the next release, right?
yeah, but I was just talking about technical. So technically, if it's gonna end up in the release branch, then it's already part of the 2.1 release. So I didn't want to tackle on the naming on the contribution guide, unless there's something different written, and that's why you're confused.
I don't know.
So
Maybe.
like technically how it's going to work. Like we want to produce artifacts whenever there's a new thing merged into the release branch. So anyone can check before the release. But it also means that whatever is in the artifact, like the candidate, it means it's in the release, right? So let's say there's a PR from Laurent about extending the examples object to have name, I guess, as far as I remember, in the object of the example. And if it's going to be merged in the parser.js, in the schema, and in the spec, we will automatically publish artifacts. So anyone can use the parser supporting the new example and can read the spec, the candidate for 2.1. And it basically means that if it's in the artifact, then it's going to get into the release.
Yeah. What I was referring to is that we have these labels, right, on the spec repo. That's if it's IFC0, if it's 2, 3, whatever.
Oh.
And it's all those that are reached the end of the stage 3 that is being merged into the new release, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if they haven't reached that stage, they are not included in the next release.
Yes. Yes. I mean, yeah, it has to follow the contribution guide. Yes. But this contribution guide is also new to us. So we just copied it from GraphQL. So let's hope it's going to work for us in practice. In theory, it so far looks good. Any other questions? Okay, so we have like almost 20 minutes left. Anyone has something that was not in the agenda, wants to ask something? Are we going to finish earlier today? You sure? Okay, so if anyone wants to help with the release, with automation, I guess it's going to be challenging if you're not using Google Analytics, Google Actions as much as we do. So I already assumed that it's probably going to be me working on it. But anything else, like review of the examples of docs and like preparing release notes, if somebody wants to volunteer here.
What is Google Actions?
Did I say Google Actions? It's not I wanted to say GraphQL Actions. GitHub Actions, of course. I meant GitHub Actions. Thank you, Jonas. Happy to have you. Yes, GitHub Actions. So yeah, we're on Slack. We can talk there. You don't have to volunteer now to have it recorded.
Yeah, I don't mind helping with proofreading or sort of making suggestions to documentation and release notes. That's yeah, no problem with helping with that.
Awesome, perfect. Thank you. We have
I'm quite happy to help with reading any docs if you want some English language review stuff. I'm very happy to help with that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. For the recording, it was Ian. So if we have to dig in and point out that somebody promised to help, sorry. Yeah, also, of course I was joking. So yeah, let's not.
I guess actually, sorry, I just thought one other quick plug. If anyone has some time today, it's Kafka Summit today, which is like the big Kafka community event. Lorna Mitchell and I have both got sessions on AsyncAPI. It's free to register and it's all online. And we're also both running demo sessions on things you can do with AsyncAPI and Kafka. So I'm sure Lorna would appreciate people coming along to support, and I know I would. So if you're interested or have some time, please do come along and help.
I'm all signed up, mate. I think I'll pass word around our building about it. So
Fantastic, thank you.
Awesome. Good. Thanks for reminding. If you can, after the call, send me some links. I'm gonna share them on our social media. So
Brilliant, will do.
yeah. Okay, cool. Good luck.
Thank you.
Okay, so 15 minutes before time, end time. Thanks a lot for joining, and fingers crossed that 2.1 will happen in June without issues. Cheers.